Hey everyone, it's Sarah De Silva here. I'm literally not wearing makeup today. I'm just showing up to literally just talk to you a bit about my story. Probably some of the people who have subscribed here may have subscribed from my original page, which was Sarah De Silva AU on Instagram. I started out as a self-love coach, and now some of you who have subscribed have either now come here through YouTube or have come through my current Twitter or my current um, Instagram, which is Heal the Mum Wound. Now, both pages are extreme, stark contrast of each other. One talks about sunshine, rainbows, and self-love, like I was talking about in my last video. And this one talks about abuse and complex PTSD and narcissistic abuse primarily, and the effects that come through manipulation and abuse over time. So I just wanted to address some of the things that, you know, I think are probably just filling in the blanks, I guess. They're filling in the blanks in between what some of the people who already follow me now want to know, and the people who followed me in the past may want to get. And if any of this doesn't vibe with you, you can totally unsubscribe. That's totally fine, because we're having an overhaul here. So I want my audience to vibe with what I'm talking about anyway, so that's totally sweet with me. But I went through a little bit of a journey, and so I'm going to explain that to you here. So I think it was 2016, I decided to become a self-love coach. I did all of my NLP certification, coaching certification, and influencing on the stage, performing on the stage certification. So I did a few different ones through my mentor, and it was really valuable. I learned so much, and I've helped a lot of people through that coaching program and that process. And anyone who's come out of that process, has improved their lives threefold. I have clients who have now become coaches, which is amazing. And I love that. That's like so inspiring to me, because if I can coach someone to the point of them actually helping someone, like that's the only kind of outcome that I could be searching for. Because that's the whole idea here, sharing stories and helping people, because I want to change the world to be a better place. And if you go through something that's hardcore, if you go through trauma, abuse, anything, the idea when you've healed is that you don't want anyone, like most people say this, they don't want anyone else to experience what they've experienced. So a lot of people do end up going into some sort of sphere where they're helping people through that. So I kind of jumped a few hurdles and started helping people, but then went through a big crisis of my own, which was I was in the middle of coaching, had become a fully qualified coach through all of my practice and everything. And then it was one day in the middle of a session, in the middle of a coaching session, luckily, my partner was home. I had a seizure, and I'd never had a seizure before. It was very, very shocking, traumatic, and confusing. Luckily, that client of mine was very understanding. It wasn't on video or anything like that, thank God. They just kind of heard things like, and they were calling out my name. My partner came in the room and was like, whoa, what's going on? So they hung up, and I was taken to the hospital. And so I found out then that I had epilepsy, something that can develop, that you kind of have, that can develop later on in life, and you don't really have an idea of where it's come from, but it's a family genetic thing that has just developed. And then not long after that diagnosis of epilepsy, I was diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer. So at the age of 27, I found out that I had one of the most aggressive forms of breast cancer, which was genetic. and that in my left breast, fortunately, it was only a very small lump that I had found, and I was stage 1. But due to the age that I had cancer, and due to the severity of the form of cancer that I had, it was recommended that I did heavy chemo, and I did heavy chemo for 6 months. Then I had a full mastectomy, so cut out both of my breasts and got some implants put in. So I do have the form, I just don't have the function anymore. But I'm glad I did it, that was a really big healing experience for me, because it was something that I was afraid of from when I was young. It's almost as though I had an intuition that I was going to have cancer. For some reason, I was very afraid of cancer. I was very wary of cancer. I was very interested in understanding how cancer worked and how to prevent cancer. I'd seen my mum be sick my entire life, and I went traveling around the world, at the age of 19. I went and taught English over in Thailand. I studied yoga in India. I traveled through Europe and came back through Turkey, and then got home. And during this whole journey overseas, I was telling my mum all these amazing healing things that I had been learning. And then when I got back, she told me that she had breast cancer and kept it secret from me. And I was quite angry that she'd kept it secret from me, because she knew that I was so passionate about healing and health and everything. And it felt quite invalidating that she ignored everything I was saying and also didn't tell me what she was experiencing. So when I eventually got breast cancer myself, we all went through the genetic testing together and found out that I have the BRCA gene, and as does my mother. I got it from her, and that's why I got breast cancer so young. However, that's not to say that it was just the gene that caused the breast cancer for me, because the gene only creates a vulnerability to the cancer. It doesn't mean that you're 100% going to get it. It means that you're 70% more likely if you're BRCA1 positive, and if you're BRCA2 positive, you're 40% more likely to get breast cancer in your lifetime. So I have BRCA1, which means that due to a lot of the trauma that I had experienced, I attributed this to that. When I had gotten cancer and was diagnosed, and I started looking at the healing journey and started to do some therapy, I attributed trauma to the reason why I got cancer so young. And I started to address it. I started to address it very heavily at the age of 27. And I realized for the first time in my life, after denying for a very, very, very long time, that I was experiencing narcissistic abuse, and that I had a very severe mother wound with my mother. So in the middle of chemo, decided to completely cut all contact with my parent, because I was experiencing extreme invalidation, and my experience was being made about my mother. So I decided, no, I can't put anyone else above me right now, because this is a healing journey. And I've talked about this in a lot of the narcissistic abuse videos that I have put up with Paxton from Narc Abuse TV. So please go and watch those, because I do talk a lot about that healing journey there. But I basically addressed that for many, many years leading up to, I'd experienced so much abuse up until the age of 18 that I left at the age of 18. I'd always told my mother that I was going to leave at the age of 18, because it was not a very nice environment that I was living in. And I'm actually looking back at when I opened my page on narcissistic abuse, Heal the Mum Wound, it was at a time in my life where I had been in no contact for about a year, and I started to think that it was a good idea to establish contact again. So it was Christmas time. I had just turned 30, and my birthday is 2 weeks before Christmas, so I hadn't received any congratulations that you're better. I hadn't received any happy birthday, you've reached a milestone, you're 30, nothing from the parent. But I decided, you know what, I'm just going to pretend that didn't all happen. And I'm going to reach out and say, Merry Christmas. And it was ignored. It was completely ignored. So I went through a very deep state of pretty much wanting to. I was very, very suicidal at the time. I didn't know where to move forward. When you realize that a parent doesn't care about you, it's pretty damn shocking. Even though they say that they care about you, but the care that they give you is conditional. It's very, very shocking to finally admit to yourself that you're pretty much alone. If both parents have a problem, you're pretty much alone in the world. And for me, it was both parents, because let's talk about dad another time. But for mother, that was a huge realization to come to, because my entire life I felt like I was in a cocoon of protection. And when you've been narcissistically abused as a child of a narcissist, you kind of feel like you are in a cocoon of protection around them, that they are the be all end all of your existence, that if they don't validate you, you cannot be validated, that if they hear you, it's everything to you. If they validate you, it's everything. If they acknowledge you, it's everything to you. But if they don't, it's the end of the world. And that's a key sign that you're in a trauma bond, basically. So you're crying out to get this love and attention and validation. And if you're a people pleaser and you're codependent with this narcissist, it's very, very hard to get out of that dynamic. But in a period of time where my health was paramount, I was in the middle of chemo, I was on the lounge, sick, not able to get out of bed, and I was being asked to do more than I could. And I decided that was enough. That was enough for me. And, as much as it was going to feel really terrible not putting my parent first anymore, I had to put myself first. So I said, I'm done. Sorry. Maybe after I feel better, I'll establish some contact. But for now, no, thank you. I'm done. I'm going to cut ties from there. And that was the hardest decision I've ever made. It's harder than any other decision I've ever made. Even, speaking about it right here in public and publicizing what I went through, that was the hardest decision. And I can understand anyone who has decided to go no contact with a narcissistic parent is going to feel the exact same way. You're going to feel confused, afraid, alone, isolated. You're going to want to turn around. You're going to cry. You're going to feel depressed. You're going to feel so many different emotions at once. Trust me. But what I want you to do when you start is to grab a book and literally grab this book and treat it like a burn book that you're going to burn if you need to. But I haven't even burnt mine, because there are more things that still come up that I still add to it. This is going to be a book that you're going to remind yourself of everything that you have experienced that makes you want to leave. And you're going to write it all down as soon as you start to realize that this is what you're experiencing. And that's what I did. I didn't know where to go therapy-wise. I started to talk to a therapist who knew about narcissistic abuse, who started to validate that for me. But at the same time, I started to write down all of these memories that were coming up. Memories that I'd never allowed myself to justify, or never allowed myself to say, hey, that was really not right. Or, hey, that was actually pretty bad. Or, hey, I'm sorry that you experienced that, because that's sad. So I started to write all of these things down, and then I started to read back these pages upon pages upon pages of things that I'd experienced. And I started to really see the reality of what I'd experienced my entire life. And that was the first time I realized that going no contact was actually the healthiest decision I'd ever made in my life. And even though it was hard, it took me about 6 months to a year to start seeing that it was even better to keep remaining no contact, keep the no contact established, and probably never try but it still took me another 2 years to probably realize that, because I even kept trying, that nothing was ever going to change. And so it takes a lot of time to go from realizing that you experienced trauma to then taking yourself out of the trauma to start healing, and then to start putting yourself in a place where you can start helping other people. And this is why my page has changed so much, because I went from talking about self-love and being kind and blah, 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 to experiencing a breakdown of all of my major relationships and my health. Even my business changed completely. And so now you have to address that big hurdle. You have to address the darkness that comes with that, and then the big change that comes with that, because not only did I change as a person, but who I have helped changes as well over time. And now I've helped people who have jumped the same hurdle as myself, who've decided to start establishing no contact with someone who's hurt them, especially when it's a parent. And if you have a mother or father wound, it doesn't matter what you have. Even though my page is called Heal the Mum Wound, it's about the love, care, and validation that you need to get from a parent that you never received. And that this page right here is establishing that you can still get that, you can still create that, you can still have all of that. But we have to address the wound of it all first. And that's what I had to do to come to this point. And I think that I'm going to make more of a mark by doing that, because all of the darkness has come into the light. None of it can be held against me. I'm not afraid to speak my truth, because that's my truth. And understanding that other people have been through the same thing is what helped me to start speaking my truth as well. So I'm just going to read a few of the posts that I started to post when I first came out of the darkness, in the sense, because I was talking about all of these good things that you can try, but I wasn't going deep into okay, yeah, you can try all these good things in your life, but if they're not working, it's because you're not addressing the wounds underneath. And so my wound was that I had been ashamed of the experiences that I was going through. I was really ashamed, because a lot of the people on my original page that were following me knew who I were, in real life, knew who I was. So I really wanted to establish a page when nobody knew who I was, and I actually created this beautiful big community of people who didn't know who I was, but came across me and could fully vibe with my experience. And that's why I felt like this audience was so much more authentic. And if you're here from that audience today, thank you, because you as well have helped me to see that I'm not alone, you're not alone, none of us are alone in this. And if you haven't experienced this, that's okay. Maybe you've heard about narcissism. Maybe you are only just learning about it now. Maybe you know someone who is quite narcissistic in your life and you need to start addressing it. It's all really important information to know if you've been manipulated over time and it's affected your health like it did with me. And when you get sick, you know that your body just can't handle what you've been forcing yourself to handle for so unbelievably long. So it's time to address those things, and that's what I did. So I put up a post, and one of my first posts that I put up that was my own was, don't be ashamed of the experiences that made you who you are. Speaking your truth will help heal other survivors. They too will know that they're not alone, and that is my purpose of being here. I want other survivors of this kind of abuse to know that they're not alone. And by sharing my story, mine may not be the same as others. There's not a lot of people who are out there who get cancer at 27, who've also experienced narcissistic abuse. But the more and more I look at this community, the more and more I'm seeing that people who experience trauma do manifest health problems in many different ways. And it's important to address that if you are manifesting health problems, severe health problems like this over time, it's generally because we're not addressing underneath what it really is happening is an emotional wound or trauma is cycling on repeat, and we haven't processed it, and it is harming us. down to a cellular level. And by keeping ourselves in the dark, we're not really addressing and healing it on all levels for ourselves. And that's why coming out of the darkness and speaking about this kind of abuse and speaking about my truth and speaking about my journey and not keeping any of it in the dark, to me, that's powerful, because it's part of bringing the darkness into the light and helping me heal and helping others heal. And if I help others heal, that's uncovering the biggest outcome I want to achieve, my purpose. So I'm just going to read out what I wrote here. I said, I kept everything I experienced a secret because I thought no one would believe me. And I know that a lot of people probably feel this way too. Especially if you've been narcissistically abused and covertly narcissistically abused, people generally won't believe you because they see the narcissistic person, the covert narcissist, in a completely different way to you. So this is why I kept it secret. I was also ashamed to the core that I was somehow tainted because I had been told that I was horrible my entire life. I was the abuser. I was the terrible daughter. I was the one who was just like, insert the name of the worst person they can think of, who was going to be sent away forever for being such a bad child. It wasn't until years later in therapy, I told my therapist I felt worthless because I was such a bad child, so I deserved to be treated like that. My therapist asked if I had stolen, if I had vandalized, if I had run away from home, if I had gotten addicted to drugs and did bad things while inebriated. Was I doing irrational or dangerous things? Did I skip school? Did I fail? And I said, no, I was actually quite a high achiever and I did pretty well at school. And realistically, like when I went out with my friends, I did experiment, but the reality was that I was the responsible friend who was making sure no one went over the top, because I was so afraid that I would be disappointing anyone. So I remained that level-headed person, that mature person, because now I see it was because I was parentified as a child. So I was the parent even in my group of friends. I told my therapist, I swore at my mother, I talked back, I threatened to leave forever. I yelled and screamed, but none of those other things. One day I got home from school to see an intervention of about 5 people who I dearly cared about, and they were all adults. My godmother, my aunt, my friend's mother, and another older woman who I saw as a mother figure. I sat in the middle of that room as she told them all that I had been corrupted by all of them, and she was cutting them off from me and cutting me off from them because I was out of control. What was really happening, though, was I was beginning to create an identity outside of my parent, and that was the start of my prison. So I was basically told that I couldn't have an identity outside of my parent, and I was cut off from my support network outside of my parent, and I only had my parent after that. Or my godmother, my other mother figures, they were all gone, and I cannot ever establish that kind of connection ever again with those people, and it's very sad. I told my therapist sometimes I would slam a door or I'd go to parties, and she thought I was staying at a friend's house. I was always the responsible friend, even though I even tried the things like drinking and some drugs like that, like everyone else. I was always the responsible friend who never pushed my boundaries. I never went over the line because I was always the one to make sure that my friends were okay, because I was the rescuer. And my therapist helped me to see that it wasn't me this whole time. It wasn't me who should be ashamed of what I went through, and it wasn't my fault. And I had absolutely no control over what I went through at that time. And it was my responsibility now to start to heal from it, even though it wasn't my responsibility what happened then. And it was okay to finally admit for the first time that I had never felt safe growing up. I'd never felt safe at home, and that I was afraid of my parent. I was actually afraid of both of my parents, terrified. So I never felt safe wherever I was. I thought that if I was naughty with this parent, I'd be sent to the other parent, and the other parent was terrifying. So I thought that I was never going to be okay until I turned 18, because then I would have full control over my life. And that's when I moved out and I took full control, and I created the life that I wanted. I freed myself. I got to tell my truth exactly as it was. And that's when I started my healing journey. But the next post that I posted here is saying, to heal, we must first acknowledge what happened. And that was my process. From going to that girl who was positive and full of gratitude and happy and energized. And that is who I am really deep down. I am this happy person who is positive and gratitude. I have so much gratitude for life every single day. And I advocate having gratitude for life. I advocate being a positive person. I advocate all of it. But first, before all of that, we need to acknowledge what we first went through. And that's what I said here. We have to acknowledge what happened, because sometimes what happened is so ingrained under so much conditioning that we don't realize the depth of what we experienced until years later. And that's what happened to me. And it's okay to talk about your whole healing journey as you're experiencing it, because everyone is going on their own journey too. Everyone's at a different level on their journey. So it's okay to be experiencing a plethora of different things with that community. But the reason why I moved from Sarah De Silva, self-love girl, to Sarah De Silva, healed the mum wound, was because this is such a big leap, such a big change. To be addressing the dark stuff was pretty scary to me, and I thought it was going to feel kind of negative, but in a way it actually started to be really healing. And that's why I'm starting to bring it out into the light a bit more now. But it's important for us to talk about experiences as they come up with someone safe, or even start journaling. And so that's what I did. The holistic psychologist was the first inspiration for me to actually go no contact, because I saw such an influential person who was such a healing figure in a lot of people's lives had gone no contact for their well-being. I saw that it was probably a good idea. And that I was reading through all these people who had done the exact same thing. And I was feeling like, maybe this is a good idea, even though I was like being spiritually bypassed in a way by healers, and, with the religious idea that we have to honor our mother and our father, and we can't cut them off, and we have to look after them. And I was being told that I had to look after my parent, and then I couldn't ever leave, that I was stuck there forever, and that I was binded to them. Basically, I was their parent in a way. To then do this huge flip to the other way was a huge healing process for me. But to also see other people doing it as well, that was where the freedom started to come through. And that's why I opened up my page, because I wanted other people to see that if I'm doing it and other people are doing it, there's probably more people searching for people who are doing this, who are talking about it, who are being honest about their experiences, who have experienced this and are talking about as they're going through it. So I opened it up, and I opened the forum for people to talk about that in their experiences too. So this has been the most healing journey for me. I am not the person that I used to be at all. I'm a completely new person. The person that I once was this insecure, ashamed, guilty woman who was afraid of being herself and afraid of speaking her mind, to the complete opposite now, where I'm not even afraid of people not liking me. I really don't care, because that means that I'm making a ripple. That means that I am ruffling up some feathers, and manipulators don't like that. And the manipulators that I've cut myself off from don't dare come near me, because they know that I can pick it from a mile away. I can see exactly what they're doing. So they're never going to be able to do it to me again. And by teaching others about this exact process of healing, understanding manipulation, and preventing it from happening again, I'm helping people to put themselves in a position of power. The more and more people that get into a position of power, the more and more we can combat manipulation. the more and more we can prevent it from happening. The more and more people like this get pushed to either work on themselves and change themselves, or they get pushed out of communities and society because it just doesn't vibe with the world anymore. It doesn't work. We are seeing gaslighting and manipulation work on a macro level down to a micro level. That means from like a high level, meaning government, and higher than that, down to individual relationships. And if we can spot this from a mile away, and we can prevent it from a mile away, it can no longer hide in the darkness. It can no longer be happening because we're stopping it before it even happens. If you can pick a person's manipulative tactics, if you can tell that they're lying or if they're trying to manipulate you before they even begin to do it, with practice, this comes, they cannot have power over you anymore. Eventually, you stop caring about their attempts because they just can't even penetrate your self-love and self-care bubble that you've created for yourself. And that comes from creating a really, really strong sense of identity. That comes from a lot of work. And that's what I've created from addressing the darkness and the lightness. But until then, start educating yourself on this kind of stuff. Don't be afraid to bring it out into the light. And I'm not afraid to bring it out into the light anymore, because my life has never been better since establishing no contact with people who are manipulative and abusive. I will give people a chance who want to work, grow, get help and support, and take responsibility for those things. Because just as much as I can, and the people in my life can do that, an abuser and manipulator has a choice and the responsibility to do that for themselves as well. Unless someone can actually do that, they cannot be in your life. They cannot be in my life. They cannot be in yours. They need to be shunned. That's it. They just cannot be a part of anything that makes up your reality, because eventually, over time, it breaks down your sense of identity. It breaks down your sense of self-esteem and confidence. And if you don't have an identity, if you don't have self-esteem or confidence, then you question everything you do. You get anxious, you get depressed, you feel like you don't have a place in the world. And eventually, over time, this trauma builds and you get sick from the PTSD that you're experiencing. Just like me, as a warning label, as a warning message and a warning story, to not let it go past your boundaries when it comes to relationships, and your time boundaries, and your work boundaries, and your health boundaries, not letting anything go past those boundaries, because if it does, over time, you'll end up just like I did, having to address the stuff in the darkness, in the hardest parts of your life, where you do feel like life isn't worth living anymore. And I don't want people to feel like that, because knowing that there's someone else out there who's experiencing the same thing, knowing that there's someone out there who can help you through that, is a light, a beacon of light in that experience where you feel like there's no hope left. So this has turned from my story into some inspiration for yourself. But I hope that it's filled in a little bit of the gaps in between, that at 27, that was when everything changed for me. I'm 30 now. It's been a 3-year journey. And my business has now shifted into teaching people about abuse, manipulation, narcissism, and complex PTSD. But underneath all of that, it's about really loving yourself, because when you can prevent yourself from going through things like that, because you know about them, because we didn't know about them before, then that means you're loving yourself. If you can watch out and hold your boundaries strong, you're loving yourself. And that's where the true self-love comes from. Knowing how to stand up for yourself, knowing how to put up boundaries, knowing how to say no, knowing who to cut off, knowing when things are not working anymore, knowing when to take yourself out of an environment that's harming you, knowing when to take a break or a rest because you're getting overworked or burnt out. All of these things come underneath that self-love stuff. But all of those things were things that I was ashamed of, going through trauma, feeling guilty for saying no, being a people pleaser, being codependent, not being able to make my own decisions, not feeling self-confident or having high self-esteem. All of those things were who I was before. But addressing the darkness of my life is what helped me to overcome all of those things and become the power that I am right now. Sit in that power when it comes, and you can see that no one can penetrate this little bubble. They can try, and you see it come, and then you start practicing flinging it away. And at first it feels a bit weird, you feel a bit uncomfortable, but then over time you're like, no, I can keep this actually quite strong. No one's going to break this wall anymore. So I want you to see that this is a journey. It takes time. It takes years sometimes. Keep doing the work. It's not easy. There are very many steps in doing the work. And that's why I'm here. That's why I'm sharing the journey, because I want you to know that you're not alone. That if you've experienced childhood abuse, if you've experienced narcissistic abuse, if you've experienced invalidation, if you're still going through it right now, if you feel like you can't stand up for yourself, if you feel like you can't say no, if you're a people pleaser, if you feel like you're constantly exhausted, if you feel like you have too much going on in your life and you don't know when there's going to be a moment to rest or relax or have a moment to think, know that this is the place for you to be right now. Everything that I talk about is going to help you on the journey to getting where I am right now, which is in a place of power and control over your life with a strong sense of self and identity, of who I am in the world, strong sense of good relationships in my life, and really not giving an F-U-C-K about what anyone thinks about my life or how I live it, and actually not giving an F about throwing people out if they want to hurt me or if they don't feel right, or throwing out situations or jobs or anything that doesn't feel right, and creating your life how you want it. You're in the right place, because that's what we do here. So I want you to know that me sharing my story is for you to feel like you're less alone, and to also know that if someone can go from where I was to where I am now, and there's so many other people out there who can do it, you can too. Keep following along and don't give up. Even when the journey gets as dark as me getting cancer and having no parents in my life, even to the point of I have 2 sisters in my life who have a disability, and they were taken out of my life because I decided to cut off my parent. They used to come to my house and stay. I used to have them all over my house all the time. I used to have them in my life way more than I do now. And as a consequence of making this decision to cut off my parent, I'm not allowed to have that in my life anymore. I'm only allowed to go there under their conditions. But in order to have the peace that I want in my life, I've said, okay. I've said, that's what I'll do to have my sisters in my life. The person who treats you that way is not going to like you taking control of your life. They might give you conditions. They might try to take things away from you. But as long as you create what you need and what you want, and acceptance for what is outside of that, you can create so much power. They can't take everything away from you. You can create everything that you want outside of them. Even those relationships that they try to take away from you, eventually those relationships will see the reality of what's going on. And that's what's happening for me right now. It doesn't take very long for a narcissist to be demasked if they're constantly blaming everyone else for being the problem other than taking responsibility for themselves. So I want you to know that you are allowed to heal, that you don't have to stay a certain way. I'm reading another post here. That you don't have to stay a certain way to fulfill anyone's needs. If someone consistently drains you, makes you sad or anxious, even after you have asserted your strong boundaries, that you are allowed to let them go. It's your responsibility to look after you first, even if that means upsetting others. Take yourself, take your life and put it in your hands. Choose what you want and know that you're not alone. Keep watching these videos. I post a new one every week. And know that you're never, ever alone. Please post your questions. I'd love updates from anyone who watches these videos on what you want to see next, because what I post is dictated upon you guys. Please hit like and subscribe. Otherwise, I hope to see you again soon. Lots of love.